Welcome to the training for mandated reporters, an overview of reporting requirements for custodians provided by New York State Justice Center for the Protection of People with Special Needs. This training is designed for custodians as defined by the Protection of People with Special Needs Act. During this presentation, we will provide an overview of the Protection of People with Special Needs Act and definitions, reporting requirements for custodians, examples of reportable incidents, how and what to report. Finally, we will discuss what happens after you make a report to the Vulnerable Persons Central Register, also known as the VPCR. Protection of People with Special Needs Act and definitions. The Justice Center was established by the Protection of People with Special Needs Act, enacted as Chapter 501 of the laws of 2012. The intent of the Act was to create a durable set of consistent safeguards for all vulnerable persons that will protect them against abuse, neglect, and other conduct that may jeopardize their health, safety, and welfare, and to provide fair treatment to the employees upon whom they depend. In addition to establishing the Justice Center, the Protection of People with Special Needs Act mandates that the Justice Center operate a statewide hotline, referred to as the Vulnerable Persons Central Register or the VPCR, to ensure that allegations of reportable incidents are promptly reported and fully investigated, that responsible individuals are held accountable, and that providers implement corrective action plans to prevent future incidents. Further, the Protection of People with Special Needs Act identifies certain people who are defined as mandated reporters and requires these people to report reportable incidents involving vulnerable persons to the Justice Center's Vulnerable Persons Central Register. Let's do a quick overview of some important terms. Who is a mandated reporter? There are two types of mandated reporters. The Act defines a mandated reporter as either a human services professional or a custodian. Most importantly, mandated reporters play a critical role in eliminating abuse and neglect. Your call can make a difference in protecting an individual in your care from abuse or neglect. Human services professionals are those who may not see a service recipient on a daily basis, but who interact with the individual during the course of providing professional services. Examples include, but are not limited to, physicians, social workers, licensed mental health counselors, teachers, school nurses, and peace officers. Custodians are individuals who are employed by or volunteer at state-operated, licensed, or certified facilities or agencies under the Justice Center's jurisdiction. Consultants, volunteers, or contractors of organizations or companies that contract with facilities and agencies under the Justice Center's jurisdiction are also considered to be custodians if they have regular and substantial contact with a service recipient. A mandated reporter must report a reportable incident to the VPCR when the incident involves or is committed against a vulnerable person. What do these terms, reportable incidents and vulnerable persons, mean? There are three general types of reportable incidents: abuse, neglect, and significant incident. We'll discuss reportable incidents in more detail later in this presentation. Who is a vulnerable person? Under the Protection of People with Special Needs Act, vulnerable persons are defined as individuals who may be vulnerable to abuse and neglect because of their reliance on professional caregivers in state-operated, licensed, or certified facilities, programs, or agencies. Vulnerable persons are not necessarily individuals with disabilities, although many are. Throughout this training, we'll refer to vulnerable persons as service recipients. Who are the agencies that serve vulnerable persons? Generally, facilities licensed, operated, or certified by the following state oversight agencies are within the Justice Center's jurisdiction: the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities, or OPWDD, the Office of Mental Health, OMH, the Office of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Services, OASIS, the Office of Children and Family Services, OCFS, the Department of Health, or DOH, and the State Education Department, SED. If you have any further questions about these terms or your role as a mandated reporter, we encourage you to talk with your supervisor and visit the websites of the Justice Center and your state oversight agencies for more information.
Now let's talk more specifically about a mandated reporter's reporting obligations. As we've discussed, as a custodian, you are legally required to contact the VPCR if you believe a reportable incident has occurred. However, the welfare and safety of the service recipients in your care must remain your first concern. In an emergency situation, your first call should be to 911. After 911 has been called and you have ensured that your service recipients are safe and protected from harm, call the VPCR. If it is not an emergency situation, but you believe a crime may have been committed against an individual receiving services, contact local law enforcement. When is reporting required? If you have reasonable cause to suspect that a reportable incident has occurred, you must report it to the VPCR immediately upon discovery. As mentioned earlier, the Justice Center has an obligation to ensure that all investigations of reportable incidents are investigated. Reportable incidents may prove to be unsubstantiated upon investigation, but it is your responsibility to report all incidents to ensure that all potential abuse and neglect and other situations are investigated. So, what do we mean when we say you must report immediately? Immediately means right away. Immediate reporting may be delayed to take the necessary steps to call 911, implement safety measures to protect the service recipient from further harm, or to follow internal facility procedures. However, no internal procedure should significantly delay a report to the Justice Center. Staff going off duty does not justify a delay in reporting. A report that is delayed more than 24 hours may be considered obstruction of reports. And what does it mean to report upon discovery? Discovery means that one of two things has happened. Either you witness a suspected reportable incident, or another person, including a service recipient or family member, provides you with reasonable cause to suspect that a service recipient has been subjected to a reportable incident. Finally, what is reasonable cause? Reasonable cause to suspect generally means that based on all the evidence, facts, and circumstances known or readily available to you, it is rational to think that the service recipient was subjected to a reportable incident. If a reasonable person would have a rational or sensible suspicion that an event that qualifies as a reportable incident may have occurred, that is enough to require a report to the Justice Center. Conclusive evidence that a reportable incident occurred is not required. When deciding whether there is reasonable cause to suspect that a reportable incident occurred, you should consider your own observations, trainings, experiences, and common sense in assessing the reliability of information presented to you, as well as assessing whether the service recipient suffered an injury, and if so, whether you believe the explanation of how the injury occurred. If you are unsure whether you have a reasonable cause to suspect that a service recipient was subjected to a reportable incident, we encourage you to report the incident to the Justice Center. In order to protect those in your care, it is always best to err on the side of caution. You could also consult with your supervisor, quality assurance staff, or other appropriate staff. Remember, however, each mandated reporter has a personal obligation to report a suspected reportable incident individually to the Justice Center. For a reportable incident to be reported to the Justice Center, you must suspect that the incident was committed by a custodian. You do not need to know who committed the incident to make a report. You just need to suspect that the incident occurred while the vulnerable person was receiving services from a facility, program, or agency that is under the jurisdiction of the Justice Center. There are some examples of reportable incidents that do not require the involvement of custodians, but generally, the jurisdiction of the Justice Center is limited to the actions of custodians. We'll discuss this in more detail later in this presentation. Other important concepts regarding your obligation to report are: the service recipient does not have to suffer harm for an incident to be reportable. The potential for harm must also be reported. Even if the reportable incident occurred at a different facility or program from where you are employed, once you become aware that something reportable has occurred, you are required to report the incident to the VPCR. Group reporting is not permitted. Mandated reporters must report individually unless the multiple reporting exception applies. Where multiple reports to the VPCR would be made regarding the same incident, as a mandated reporter, you are not required to report the allegation to the VPCR when both of the following conditions are met. You have actual knowledge that the incident was already reported to the VPCR, and you have actual knowledge that you were named in the report as a person with knowledge of the incident. For more information on this exception, see Relief from Requirement for Multiple Reporting of Reportable Incidents guidance on the Justice Center website. To have actual knowledge, you must have direct and clear awareness that the report was made, such as witnessing, reading, or overhearing the report being made to the VPCR. Having actual knowledge also includes being told by the person who reported the incident that he or she made the report to the VPCR and that you were named in the report. If you have any doubts as to whether the report was made or whether you were named in the report, you should report the incident yourself. To protect yourself, as the mandated reporter, from a possible allegation that you failed to report an incident to the VPCR, the Justice Center recommends that you document the reason for your decision not to report. How you document the decision is left to the discretion of you and the provider agency. Although not required, obtaining the confirmation number from the person who reported the incident is a good way to document the basis for your decision not to make a duplicate report to the VPCR. In a situation where the multiple reporting exception applies and you, in good faith, have made a reasonable decision not to make a report, you will not be charged with obstruction for failing to make a report. However, if you feel unsure of your ability to explain your decision not to report, or you feel concerned that the incident was not accurately reported, it is always an acceptable practice to make a duplicate report to the VPCR. Moreover, a provider agency may not, in any manner, restrict or attempt to restrict you from making a report to the VPCR. Mandated reporters are personally responsible for reporting an incident to the VPCR. Your employer or supervisor cannot tell you that you may not report if you believe that you are required to do so. You are not obligated by the Justice Center to tell your employer that you made a report to the VPCR. However, your employer may require you to also make an internal report of an incident. We encourage you to speak to your supervisor about your internal reporting procedures and responsibilities. Let's review some examples to illustrate these points.
Is it reportable? A 14-year-old boy lives at an Office of Mental Health residential treatment facility and spends the weekends at home with his family. On Monday, his parents return him to the residential treatment facility where staff discover a cigarette burn on his neck that was not there on Friday. Is the incident reportable to the Justice Center? No. In this case, because there is no basis to believe that the burn was caused by a custodian, this incident would not be reportable to the Justice Center. However, it would be reportable to the State Central Register of Child Abuse and Maltreatment, also called the State Central Register. Suspicion of child abuse and neglect of children under the age of 18 in a daycare setting, foster home, or within a family home must continue to be reported to the statewide Central Register of Child Abuse and Maltreatment by calling 1-800-635-1522. You are riding in the agency van with people receiving services and another staff member who is driving the van. The driver was eating a large breakfast sandwich while driving. In order to eat the sandwich, the driver used both his hands and steered with his knees. He was driving 10 miles over the speed limit in a well-populated area with lots of vehicular and pedestrian traffic. He stopped abruptly frequently. After returning to the house, some of the people riding in the van told you they were afraid they were going to get into an accident. Is the incident reportable to the Justice Center? Yes. Even though there was no accident and people receiving services didn't suffer a physical injury, there was potential for harm because of the way the van was being driven. When deciding whether there is a reasonable cause to suspect that a reportable incident occurred, you should consider your own observations, training, experience, and common sense in assessing the situation. Driving with your knees and speeding in well-populated areas puts people receiving services at risk of being in a car accident. In this case, some of the people riding in the van said they were afraid while they were riding in the van. A 25-year-old woman shows up at the day habilitation program with a bleeding gash on her arm. She lives in a facility certified by the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities as an individual residential alternative. She is transported between the facility and the day habilitation program by a transportation company under contract with the facility. Is the incident reportable to the Justice Center? Yes. In this example, this incident is reportable to the VPCR even if staff at the day habilitation don't know if the individual was injured at the individual residential alternative or on the van. Both are settings under the jurisdiction of the Justice Center and staff are custodians. If you become aware that an individual has been subjected to a reportable incident at a different facility or program, you are required to report the incident to the VPCR. A person receiving services reports that a staff member placed his hands on her neck and squeezed it during a restraint that occurred on the previous day. You observe bruises on the person's neck. Is the incident reportable to the Justice Center? Yes. You have reasonable cause to suspect that a reportable incident occurred because the person receiving services reported to you that a staff member placed his hands on her neck and you observed bruises there. A person receiving services tells you that when he was being driven to a medical appointment by another staff person, the staff person stopped at her house and left him alone in the car for 5 minutes. The person receiving services regularly engages in self-injurious behavior and requires line-of-sight supervision while awake. Is the incident reportable to the Justice Center? Yes. Whenever a person receiving services is placed in a situation in which there is potential for harm, the incident should be reported. In this case, the person receiving services requires line-of-sight supervision while awake because of self-injurious behaviors. You observe staff placing a person receiving services in an authorized restraint using the proper technique. During the restraint, the person begins screaming rape. Is the incident reportable to the Justice Center? No. You observed a staff member using the proper technique in a restraint and was merely holding the person's legs. You witnessed a proper restraint, which is not a reportable incident. You discover that a person receiving services has a swollen, bloody nose and what appear to be fresh bruises on her face, chest, back, and arms. The person cannot or will not explain how these injuries occurred, and no other people receiving services or staff on duty at the time can explain the injuries. Is the incident reportable to the Justice Center? Yes. When deciding whether there is reasonable cause to suspect that a reportable incident occurred, you should consider your own observations, training, experience, and common sense in assessing the reliability of information presented to you, as well as assessing whether the person receiving services suffered an injury. In this case, the person has multiple injuries, and no one is able or willing to provide an explanation for the injuries. Remember, conclusive evidence that the injuries were caused by a custodian is not required. Identifying the custodian is also not a requirement when making a call to the VPCR. A person receiving services tells you that a staff member kicked him on his back approximately 1 week ago. You discover a number of bruises on his back. You can't be sure if they are caused by a kick, but you believe them. A supervisor tells you that you do not need to report this incident to the Justice Center. Is the incident reportable to the Justice Center? Yes. Remember, your employer or supervisor cannot tell you that you may not make a report to the VPCR if you believe that you are required to do so. Further, you are not obligated by the Justice Center to tell your employer that you made a report to the VPCR. However, your employer may require you to also make an internal report of an incident. A staff person takes one of the agency vehicles for an oil change. The staff person drove by herself, and there was no one who received services in the vehicle. The staff person was talking on her cell phone when she ran a red light and was hit by oncoming traffic. The staff person was taken to the hospital and issued a traffic ticket. Is the incident reportable to the Justice Center? No. Incidents are only reportable if people receiving services are harmed or there was potential for harm. In this case, there were no people receiving services riding in the vehicle when the accident occurred. As a mandated reporter, how to report an incident is crucial to your role. Mandated reporters can call the toll-free 24-hour hotline at 1-855-373-2122. For individuals using New York Relay Service, dial 711 and give the operator the number 1-855-373-2122. There is a web form as well as a mobile app that are also available for reporting abuse and neglect. For more information about these options, visit the Incident Reporting portion of the Justice Center website. When you call the VPCR to report an incident, You will be asked a number of questions. You may not be able to answer everything, but any information you have is important. In addition to your name and contact information, the types of information you'll be asked for include the details regarding the victim, the subject, the person who is alleged to have committed abuse or neglect of a service recipient, and the witness. You will also be asked to provide the details of the incident, including the date, time, and location, and the description of the incident and how it impacted the victim. You will also be asked the state oversight agency responsible and the name and address of the specific agency, facility, and/or program. In addition, you will be asked to confirm that immediate protections are in place for the victim, which can include the separation of the service recipient and subject of the report. If applicable, you may also be asked the name, title, and contact information of others who may have the same information as you. Finally, you will be asked if there is any other information that may assist with the investigation or review of the incident. You are required to report even if you don't know all of the answers to these questions. We encourage you to report as soon as you suspect that an incident has occurred. Do not delay calling to gather more information. Your call may be instrumental in protecting a service recipient. It may take a few minutes to discuss all the details of the incident. We suggest that you call from a quiet location to facilitate communication. State laws protect mandated reporters from retaliation. A state agency, facility or provider agency, school, medical, or other public or private institution cannot take any retaliatory personnel action as defined in the Labor Law, Section 740(1)(e), against an employee or agent because that person, acting in good faith, makes a report to the VPCR. In other words, you cannot be fired or have a shift changed or hours reduced because you made a report to the VPCR when you believed there was reasonable cause to suspect that a service recipient had been subjected to abuse or neglect. In addition, if it is determined that a custodian has retaliated against a mandated reporter who makes a report in good faith, that custodian may be subjected to a substantiated finding of abuse for obstruction. If you believe that you are being retaliated against for making a report, you should call the VPCR. So, what protections are there for mandated reporters once you place the call? As a mandated reporter, your identity is confidential and may not be publicly disclosed. You may ask that your identity not be disclosed, but it may be necessary to disclose your identity to the person investigating the reported incident in order to ensure that an incident is thoroughly investigated. The Justice Center makes every reasonable effort to protect the identity of mandated reporters, especially when a reporter is alleging that he or she is the victim of retaliation for making a report. Finally, if you make a report to the VPCR because you had reasonable cause to suspect a reportable incident has occurred, the subject of the report may not sue you if the allegation is not substantiated. Immunity will not be granted to someone found making an intentionally false report. What happens if you fail to report? A delay or failure in reporting can be a form of abuse. A mandated reporter who knowingly and willfully fails to report suspected abuse or neglect to the VPCR may be subject to termination and may be sued in civil court for monetary damages for any harm caused by the failure to make a report.
What needs to be reported to the VPCR? As mentioned earlier, the Protection of People with Special Needs Act defines three types of incidents that must be reported: abuse, neglect, and significant incidents. We are going to provide some more information about these three types of incidents, but you are not required to know what type of incident has occurred in order to make a report. We rely on you to make a report so that the incident can be investigated. For more detailed information on abuse, neglect, and significant incidents, we encourage you to visit our website, review any guidance documents from your state oversight agency, and talk to your supervisor or quality assurance staff. The first type of incident is abuse. The Protection of People with Special Needs Act defines these 7 categories of abusive conduct by a custodian as reportable: physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse, deliberate and inappropriate use of restraints, use of aversive conditioning, obstruction of reports of reportable incidents, unlawful use or administration of a controlled substance. Broadly, abuse is an action by a custodian against the service recipient that causes or has the potential to cause injury or serious protracted impairment of the physical, mental, or emotional condition of a service recipient. Remember, the service recipient does not have to suffer harm for an incident to be reportable. The potential for harm must also be reported. Neglect is also reportable under the Protection of People with Special Needs Act. The Act defines neglect as any breach in a custodian's duty that results in or is likely to result in death, physical injury, or impairment of the physical, mental, or emotional condition of a service recipient. Most commonly, neglect is the result of a custodian's lack of attention or failure to act as required by his or her responsibilities. Neglect can include, but is not limited to, failure to provide proper supervision, failure to provide adequate food, clothing, shelter, medical, dental, optometric, or surgical care, and failure to provide access to educational instruction. The final type of reportable incident is defined as a significant incident. A significant incident is an incident that does not meet the definition of abuse or neglect, but one that may result in, or has the potential to result in, harm to the health, safety, or welfare of a person receiving services. The Justice Center does not make any determinations regarding significant incidents, but we do work with the state oversight agencies on corrective action plans that outline steps to avoid such incidents from reoccurring. Again, while significant incidents may not be as serious as abuse or neglect, they must be reported. The Protection of People with Special Needs Act identifies three categories of significant incidents. The first is any action on part of the custodian that is inconsistent with practices, laws, policies, or actions that is simply inconsistent with an individual's treatment plan. The Act identifies four non-exclusive forms of conduct: unauthorized seclusion, unauthorized timeout, administration of medication inconsistent with a prescription or doctor's orders, and inappropriate use of restraints. This is a broad category and may include other inappropriate or inconsistent forms of conduct. As a mandated reporter, you should report to the Justice Center any action or incident that you believe has impacted or may impact a service recipient's health, safety, or welfare. The second category of significant incident is defined as conduct between persons receiving services that may result in or has the reasonable foreseeable potential to harm the health, safety, or welfare of the service recipient. The Justice Center does not investigate or prosecute actions of service recipients. However, these incidents must be investigated to determine if they resulted from neglect on the part of the custodian or the facility or program. Finally, state oversight agencies may define specific types of incidents or events that should be reported to the VPCR as significant incidents. We encourage you to talk with your supervisors regarding the specific regulations and requirements of your state oversight agency regarding significant incidents. The next few slides will give you an understanding of what happens when and after a report is made. What happens when an initial report is made? A trained staff takes a full report and carefully enters all details of the incident into the VPCR. All calls are recorded and an incident number is assigned at the end of each call. Did you know that most of our VPCR call center representatives have worked as direct support professionals? After the call, the reportable incident is classified as abuse, neglect, or significant incident. Non-reportable calls include general inquiries or calls that are not within the Justice Center's jurisdiction and as a result cannot be investigated by the Justice Center. Once a report is classified, a case is created and assigned to the appropriate entity for investigation. Once assigned, the investigation begins. Regardless of who is conducting the investigation, the Justice Center reviews all abuse and neglect investigations and makes the final determination about whether or not the allegation is substantiated or unsubstantiated. Once a determination is made, the Justice Center notifies the victim and his or her personal representative, the subject in the case, and the provider agency director or CEO of the outcome. For purposes of confidentiality, mandated reporters and witnesses are not notified of the outcome of the investigation. The Justice Center does not make a determination regarding significant incidents. However, a state oversight agency may request that a provider agency develop a corrective action plan if there is an issue of concern. Okay, let's review what we've learned today. Under the Protection of People with Special Needs Act, employees of certain facilities, programs, or agencies operated, licensed, or certified by the 6 state oversight agencies are mandated reporters. As a mandated reporter, you have certain obligations. Reportable incidents must be reported to the Justice Center immediately and upon discovery. Immediately means right away. Reporting cannot be delayed because of staff going off duty. However, reporting may be delayed to prevent harm or follow internal safety procedures. Discovery occurs when either a mandated reporter witnesses a suspected reportable incident, or another person, including a service recipient or family member, provides the mandated reporter with reasonable cause to suspect that a service recipient has been subjected to a reportable incident. And what is reasonable cause? Reasonable cause need only be a suspicion that a service recipient has experienced abuse or neglect or been placed at risk of harm. Suspecting something does not require that you have conclusive evidence that an incident occurred. A reasonable or rational suspicion based on your observations, training, and experience is sufficient justification to make a call to the VPCR. Again, your supervisor cannot tell you that you cannot report an incident to the Justice Center. As discussed earlier, where multiple reports to the VPCR would be made regarding the same incident, as a mandated reporter, you are not required to report the allegation to the VPCR when both of the following elements are met: when you have actual knowledge that the incident was already reported to the VPCR, and you have actual knowledge that you were named in the report as a person with knowledge of the incident. For additional resources available for mandated reporters, visit the Justice Center website at www.justicecenter.ny.gov. As a mandated reporter, the following contact information is available to report abuse or neglect. To report abuse or neglect, call 1-855-373-2122. For individuals that use TTY, call 1-855-373-2123. For information about the Justice Center, please visit our website at www.justicecenter.ny.gov.